Hello, and welcome to Marketing Global Edition, the podcast where we decode branding from Nairobi to New York, from Jakarta to Jeddah. I'm Jasmine Montgomery.
And I'm Piers Geiler. And today we're going to dive into a topic that is a little more colourful than usual.
Quite literally, we are asking, does colour matter in branding? Is blue really the colour of trust? Is yellow cheap? Is red powerful? Why are there no pink banks? Is it all optics or something deeper?
And more importantly, is it art or is it science? So I'm going to argue that colour in branding is about two things: category cues and standout factor. And that is it. Nothing more, nothing deeper than that.
And I naturally disagree because you always like to simplify things and I like to make them complicated. So I think that colour is soaked in history, semiotics, cultural memory, emotion. I think it's instinctive and strategic, and I think the best brands know how to work with that.
Okay, so for me, colour in branding is about looking at the competitive landscape, okay, and making one key decision. Do I want my brand to fit in and
Yeah.
speak that category language, or do I want to not do that, and do I want to stand out and differentiate in a crowded marketplace and be seen as the disruptor or the challenger brand?
Well, that is certainly, I will agree that that is an important part of the colour debate. So let's talk about that for a moment before we go deeper.
Okay, so I'll give you an example, right? There are almost no pink banks in the world. True? You know, if you
True.
think about
I
banks,
can't think of one. Yeah.
no, that's because they're all blue.
Why do you think, why are banks all blue? It is true, by the way, absolutely true. Like if you look at the FTSE 100, if you look at, the Dow, all the banks are blue, right? But most of the majority. But why? Why?
Well, it's simple. Blue is seen as a colour of trust. It's used. Big corporates use it, but banks really do use it. It's seen as a trustworthy colour.
See, I actually think it's because the founders of banks have always been men, and men gravitate to blue.
Well, there could be an element of that. It says he in a blue shirt. But, anyway, maybe. But then in categories like banks and telcos, what you often see, interestingly, is the next colour to arrive on the scene. So the first brand may take blue,
Yeah.
but then the countries interesting like US and UK that have flags that are blue, red, and white.
Yeah.
And the first one takes blue, and then the second brand that comes in often goes for red.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true on the basis that the blue is taken, and they go for the next primary colour. And yellow is notoriously hard to work with, or at least in traditional brands that was true. So I think that, yeah, I think they go for, once the blue is gone, they go for red. I think that's true, yeah.
Yeah, and then in every category there is a category language
Yeah.
in which colour plays a part. So we've just discussed banks, right?
Yeah.
Banks are mid to dark blue. Discount stores like Walmart and IKEA are much more of a bright cyan blue, and they may have some touch of yellow. It's a
Yeah.
sort of category language, really. But then telcos tend to be blue or red. So you have this sort of choice. You can look like the category or set yourself apart. And interestingly, in telcos, two brands that have done that really well are Orange.
Yeah,
So they
literally.
out as Orange and called
Yeah.
themselves Orange, interestingly.
Yeah.
That was disruptive at the time many years ago. But also T-Mobile, they went pink. Going back to
Well,
pink,
they,
pink.
yeah, that's really fascinating. I mean, there just aren't that many brands that have really, owned Pink in the way that T-Mobile has. Fascinating. Okay, so I buy all that. And if you're a brand listening to this and wondering what color you should be, a really good thing to do is to kind of plot your competition on a color wheel and see if most of your competitors gravitate to a color territory, which in so many categories they do. And then you can decide whether what you want to do is kind of leverage the cues of your category, which, if you're a startup, if you're new and you think, I just really want to look like a, healthcare provider, or I really want to look like a natural brand. If I want to look like a nature brand, I might go green just to kind of signal to everybody that I'm playing the game. I'm part of this tribe. Or you may decide to stand out and to differentiate and to be a challenger, as Piers mentioned. But that is not the only consideration.
Okay, so do you think colours have inherent meaning then?
No, not exactly. I think it's more complicated than that. So I don't think they act like symbolism, where, a cross has a specific meaning, at least in certain cultures, or a star might represent something universally understood. Again, with a little bit of cultural, bias, but generally those things are universally understood and understood in the same way by people of a similar culture. Colour, I think, acts differently. So years ago, I did a piece of research for British Telecom, BT, when they were wondering whether to change their logo. And we did something really interesting where we deconstructed their logo into its component parts. We had, the name, we had the typeface, but without the word, just name in a typeface, the colour, the symbol. And we did that with a lot of their competitors as well. And we ran focus groups and tried to understand, get people to tell us what they understood from things like the symbol, the typeface, and the brand colours. And what we found was that symbols were universally understood and interpreted in roughly the same way by all.
Mm-hmm.
Fonts were seen in the same way. Everybody saw them as either modern or classic or bold or elegant or whatever. But colour was much more open to interpretation, and some colours more than others. So green, for example, has quite a narrow bandwidth of interpretation. It tends to have three connotations. It's either nature, money, or in some parts of the world, Islamic. It's Islam, right? Like an Islamic bank. Whereas red has a much broader bandwidth of interpretation. It can be seen as love or danger, as warmth or warfare. It really varies, right? So it depends on the context it sits in. It depends on, and things like the typeface and the symbol and other elements give it that context and tell a consumer how to interpret it. But what the colour brings to the table is often an emotional resonance that elevates the brand to a much more emotional space.
Okay, but colour doesn't work the same way everywhere then, does it?
No, not at all. So I think that's super interesting. So I think at the most basic level, maybe, there are warm colours and cool colours. And actually, it goes all the way back to Sir Isaac Newton in the 17th century. He first created a colour wheel and started to look at the science of colours and identified sort of warm colours and cool colours. And we all know what those are. The cool colours are sort of your blues, greens and yellows, and your blues and greens. Your warm colours are your sort of reds and purples and oranges. But there are definitely cultural cues that differ. So, as I mentioned already, kind of in Islamic countries, green is often very much a national colour. It's associated with prosperity, with kind of Islamic. So, we've been talking about banks all being red and blue in the West, true. But if you go somewhere like Pakistan, all the banks and telcos are green, right? Because that's the sort of national flag. And, some categories like banks and telcos want to wave the national flag. We all know that in China, red is massively auspicious and lucky. So in the West, red might be more associated with like sales and discount, but in China, it's absolutely lucky. And then you get strange things like, orange, which kind of generally is seen as quite a sort of bright, perhaps disruptive, challenging colour generally in the world, except in the Netherlands, where again, although it's not the colour of their flag, it's very much a national colour. So it actually has more of a connotation of nationalism and royal family. So colours are not just design decisions, they are cultural codes.
It's a minefield, isn't it? So really, because I mean, colours are useful for being a convention. Look at me, I'm a bank. That can really help. We're in healthcare, but then you look at the same as everyone else, right?
Yeah.
And that's where differentiation comes in. So it's not always about conventions, is it? I mean, actually, sometimes it's about disruption. If everyone's blue, then to stand out, you want to be something else, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where it gets really interesting. So some brands deliberately break conventions to reframe perceptions. So, for example, and it's amazing some of the things that people get away with, like luxury brands, right? You think fashion brands, you think luxury, you think Prada, Chanel, they really tend to be black, right? You think, or maybe muted deep purples, which is a very regal colour, or perhaps neutrals, But some luxury brands just break that completely. Like Lotus Cars totally blows my mind. This is a super prestige automotive brand, luxury brand in bright yellow. Totally subverts yellow's usual associations, which are quite, cheerful kind of and discount, low rent, right? So, and something like Veuve Clicquot, another yellow brand that blows my mind because this is luxury, this is champagne, and it's a yellow-orange brand, which is fascinating.
I think now actually, relying on a single colour is becoming a bit dated now if we think about how the world has moved on.
Yes, I really agree with that. Go on, expand that. I agree.
I think it's about being digital, right? So I think
Yeah.
brands today are just much more complex in their use of color.
Hmm.
In the old days, you were stuck to billboards and packaging, and people would walk down the aisle, and you'd want yours to be a block of color so you could recognise whether
Right.
I don't know, the Tetley's tea is versus the Thai
Or like
food.
Heinz, or yeah, like Heinz ketchup or Heinz baked
Something
beans.
like
Yeah.
that, but it's
Yeah.
just not about that anymore. You know, your brand
Yeah.
lives on screens in people's hands. So the trend, I think, one of the trends now is really multicolour. So look at even Google. It's like loads of different colours. Microsoft. Look at brands like Sky, Instagram. They are a multitude of colours.
Yeah, I think that's something really interesting that comes from a real difference about the digital world, because in the digital world, color sits on black, whereas in the print world, it sits on white. I mean, something I find really fascinating is that, in the print world, you start with a white piece of paper and you add color to it, and the more you add color, the closer you get to black. But with digital, you start with a black screen and you add color, and the more color you add, the more you go to white. But it changes everything sitting on black, right? So suddenly a boring dark blue bank is not popping on a dark screen, right? Whereas like a neon bright lime green like Spotify pops because it's coming out of a dark screen.
That's so basic but so fundamental, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah,
But then there's other brands. Look at Apple, right? So Apple is a winning brand with no colour at all. They've taken the
absolutely.
colour out of it, really.
Yeah.
Its identity is white, silver, black, and colour is really used very sparingly and very strategically. They've turned minimalism, which I love,
Yeah.
into a power move, really.
The ultimate simplicity. And,
Yeah.
Piers is always about ruthless simplicity, and so is Apple. I always find it funny when clients ring us up and say, like, we want a brand and we want it to look like Apple. And then they want to add like 5,000 lines of copy and 25 brand colors. And, like, it's really hard to do that kind of ruthless simplicity that Apple does. But what's genius is, I think, their use of white, like the absence of color. And then they do use it strategically sometimes. So they will, when they're doing a particular product launch, like they might have a sort of purple glow for a purple iPhone or something, and they'll have packaging that matches the kind of device color, but really subtly. And they'll go colorful at times. So when it's Pride Month, they'll do a rainbow Apple logo, or when they're doing a tie-up with Red, the AIDS charity, like they'll do red boxes. But it's generally a no-color brand, and that really stands out, doesn't it?
Yeah, they even change, in-store displays, online banners. It's all really subtle, but it's all really well coordinated. If
Yeah.
then colour is responsive, they use it in a way where it adds meaning, or they don't do it.
Now, responsive color. This, I think, is a fascinating thing that you've just said, Gyla. I love this idea of responsive color. Where does this go in the future? So I think one day, in the not too distant future, we will see a brand with no inherent color at all, but that is able to take on and be whatever color you, the customer, are feeling that day. So imagine an entirely color responsive brand. As you're loading the website or the app, it's scanning your Instagram feed. It's reading the data from your Apple Watch, which senses your fitness mood, and it looks at perhaps your Spotify playlist. It reads your feeds, and it gives you a personal brand experience. So the UI, the UX, the interface, right, all come up in your colors or in the colors of your mood today.
God, so colour becomes this two-way conversation, yeah, not a decision. It's about
Yes.
how you're feeling. So imagine Monday mornings might be very, very dull.
Yeah, Monday
From
morning
the
was black.
your experience is like it's all a bit muted on a Monday, but great on a Friday. But it
Yeah.
is fascinating that, and likely, and also quite bonkers.
It's sort of already happening in some ways, in some other senses. So if you think about like Spotify's Studio Aura, which is Spotify creates this kind of personalized audio experience based on your music tastes. Why not have a personalized visual experience?
So brand's going to be less about logos, things like that, and more about atmospheres.
Yes, vibes, not icons. So, I mean, that's a bit of a crazy glimpse into the future. I think it's on its way. But color is not just about fitting in, or standing out. I think it's about tuning in to emotion, to culture, and even to kind of personal identity on an individual level.
Yes, and also, category cues do still matter. They really are important to be recognised that you're in a particular space. But then maybe the most powerful brands are the ones who know when to obey them and when to reinvent them.
Yeah, so color is definitely code, it's convention, but it's also conversation. And increasingly it is emotion, it's an emotion and it's a relationship.
Okay, well, I think that's us done on colourful craziness for the day. I've enjoyed that.
Yeah,
Thanks for listening.
brilliant. Listen, thank you all for listening. See you next week.
Bye for now.
Bye.
Marketing Global Edition is sponsored by Adsy, the ad generator for small businesses that serves you effective and affordable ads in seconds. And by 7 Brands, the international advertising and branding agency that has worked with clients around the world from Coca-Cola to Facebook.